Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aviation Outlook. We're glad you could join us. I'm Alan Stolzer, Dean of the College of Aviation at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. This week, across the university, from 130 classrooms around the world and on campuses in Singapore, Prescott, Arizona, and here in Daytona Beach, Florida, we are celebrating the history and accomplishments of aviation heroes, leaders, trailblazers, and dreamers during Aviation Week with special programs and events on our campuses. Earlier this week, on Monday, April 12th, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the historic flight of Yuri Gagarin, the first human to venture into space. Monday was also the 40th anniversary of the very first space shuttle launch from Kennedy Space Center. John Young and Robert Crippen took the world's first reusable manned spacecraft, Columbia, on its first test flight into space and back. Tomorrow, April 16th, is the 154th anniversary of the birthday of American aviation pioneer Wilbur Wright, who, along with his brother Orville, are generally credited with inventing, building, and flying the world's first successful piloted motor-operated airplane on December 17th, 1903. We are celebrating Wilbur's birthday at both our Prescott, Arizona and Daytona Beach, Florida campuses as a wrap-up to our Aviation Week festivities. Tonight, we are also talking to a record setter. Bonny Simi is the head of air operations and people at Joby Aviation, a leading aviation company that is developing an all-electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that it intends to operate as a commercial passenger aircraft ride-sharing service beginning in 2024. Bonny leads the development of the operating service, including flight operations, maintenance, training, safety, air carrier certification, and sustainability. She was previously the president of JetBlue Technology Ventures. She is also an airline pilot and engineer with 30 years in the aviation industry. Bonny has flown Boeing, Airbus, and Embraer aircraft at both United Airlines and JetBlue Airways. She has served in operational and strategic roles within flight operations, system operations, people, airports, customer support, and prior to leading the venture arm of JetBlue, she was the head of talent for the airline. She holds master's degrees from Stanford Graduate School of Business and Stanford School of Engineering. I mentioned earlier, Bonny is also a record setter. She is a 3-time Olympian and 10-time national champion in the sports of luge and bobsled. She was a torchbearer for the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, and following her last Winter Olympics in 1992, Bonny retired and served as a color commentator for CBS Sports during their coverage of the Winter Olympics in 1994 and 1998. Bonny Simi, what a remarkable career. Welcome to Aviation Outlook.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I've been a huge fan and supporter of the Embry-Riddle community for decades.
Excellent. Well, we're delighted you're spending the evening with us, and I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So thank you. Mm-hmm. So about 2 months ago, you were appointed as the head of air operations and people at Joby Aviation. I mentioned Joby is leading the way in advanced air mobility as it's nearing the final stages of developing a fully electric vertical takeoff and landing, known as eVTOL, a piloted 4-passenger aircraft that you plan to fly commercially in 2024. Can you tell us about that aircraft and how it will transform aviation?
Absolutely, and probably one of the first points to make is that it's all electric. And we fundamentally believe that electric propulsion is going to transform aviation, just like jet propulsion did decades ago in the 60s. And so we're starting to see some emerging platforms for electric propulsion. We believe that the Joby platform will be a true breakthrough. Because it also then has the added component, it is that it's not only electric, but it's vertical takeoff and landing, but it can also land conventionally. So it's both VTOL and CTOL, which allows us to have access into the existing aviation framework, whether it's airports or heliports, and eventually vertiports. So our is piloted. That's important. I know that's quite important to the pilots too, or getting their ratings at Embry-Riddle. So it's piloted. It'll operate within the existing airspace.
Bonnie, I understand that you have a Joby video showing the aircraft in flight.
Yeah, so I'd love to share, to truly appreciate what the vehicle is, you need to see it. And so we've shot some video at our training base in Central California. As I mentioned, we operate a fully scale prototype vehicle. And so what we're about to share is the aircraft on one of our test flights and also monitored by our ground control station. So you see we have pilots involved as well as a lot of engineers. Take a look.
Ground for GC will be spinning forward flight momentarily. Copy.
That is indeed a beautiful machine.
Yeah, and I tell you, when you fly it, we have simulators that we're building. And, as a fixed wing pilot, I have no helicopter time. As a fixed wing pilot, the instructor said, okay, Bonnie, I want you to, I took off on an aircraft on a top of a building in San Francisco, and then to fly to San Francisco and fly the approach and land on the numbers. I'm used to landing on numbers. That's pretty common, but they said, no, land on the numbers. So I'm flying the approach. It was about 140 knots, coming down and slowing. You just pull the speed back and slow. And, I'm watching the speed degrade down to 60, 40, 20, 0. And I'm hovering. You just decelerate and it transitions automatically from forward flight to vertical flight, and then you just pitch the nose down and it lands. So that's it's quite an interesting experience.
I'll bet it is. For a fixed wing pilot like myself, that would feel pretty unnatural in the beginning, I'm sure. Well, I had the privilege of visiting Joby's headquarters in Santa Cruz in late 2019, met you at that time, and I was astounded by what I saw, the innovation, the excitement, the passion. You were on the Joby board at that time, but as I mentioned, you're now part of the executive team. Can you share a bit about your role at the company?
Sure. So as you mentioned previously in your introduction, I'm with JetBlue Airways as well, and we founded the venture arm for JetBlue Airways. So it was JetBlue Technology Ventures. And the point of that was to invest in future technologies that we believe would transform aviation. So clearly Joby fits into that category. So 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, JetBlue invested in Joby, and my role at the time was to support the company from the board perspective and help them think of commercial operations. And then over time, I became more and more active with the company, and so JetBlue has asked for me to join the team to help them think about actually bring us to commercial service. So my role spans currently our operations team, was small but mighty team, because, as you mentioned, it's not till 2024 that we'll be doing commercial operations, but you have to begin laying the groundwork now, building out a 135 operation, building in the manuals and processes, starting with Part 91, building in the safety system. So we are building out an enterprise SMS, so safety management system. So in the 121 world, which of course I'm quite familiar with, SMS is mandated, hasn't yet been mandated on the 135 side, nor on the manufacturer side, but we look at this and we want to be leading in the safety space. So we're building out, because we're not only we're designing the aircraft, we're getting it certified, we're also manufacturing it. So we're the OEM. And then we're going to be the service. So we're a great platform to create an integrated safety management system. So we're laying that groundwork right now. And the other areas are same thing on the sustainability side. So safety and sustainability, when you start thinking about our manufacturing processes and working through our green initiatives, the batteries, what do we do with our batteries? Where do we source them? How do we dispose of them? All of those items are areas that fall within the early operations and the early manufacturing that we're doing. And then of course the people, coming from JetBlue and the culture, there's a very nice culture match between how Joby and JetBlue, and we think in the value and the importance of our people. So building in the people structures, as we grow from a company, from when Joby first invested many years ago, the company had about 50 people. It's about 700, and will be growing dramatically over time. So it's a lot. It's a great, and it is a really good partnership between JetBlue and Joby as well.
That's a lot of growth, and it sounds like actually a lot of fun to be part of. You had a very interesting journey that led you to where you are today, and I mentioned some of that in the intro. One of those interesting things was that you competed in 3 different Olympic Games and became a 10-time champion in the sports of luge and bobsled. There has to be a wonderful story about how you became a world-class competitor in 2 sports. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, actually, it weaves nicely into aviation as well, because when I was in high school, there was a speaker that came to our school, and he was an adventurer. His name was John Goddard, and he had come up with something like 100 things that he wanted to do when he grew up. When he was 14, he set these goals. And so we were in this audience, and I was 14. And so our assignment, school, was to go home and make a list of goals, things you wanted to achieve in life. And well, I couldn't think of 100 things, but I could think of, I want to go to a good college. The timing of it happened to be around an Olympic year, and I was watching the Olympics on TV. So I said, well, I want to be an ABC TV commentator, and I want to be an Olympian. So, dreams of a 14-year-old. Some people say they want to be, a football player or a basketball player. I just said I wanted to be an Olympian. And I also said I wanted to be a pilot. Now, when I was 14, there were not very many female pilots at all. And I hadn't even thought of it as a profession. My mother used to take us to the airport, and we'd watch airplanes take off and land. And I just thought it would be neat someday to do that. And I was thinking of small aircraft. And then I wanted to build a log cabin. Haven't gotten to that. But so this Olympic dream started early. In high school, I played in sports in high school in field hockey and got a scholarship to Stanford. So I checked off the first one, was just go to a good college. But very quickly I started thinking about, would I play field hockey in the Olympics? I thought, maybe I should first I grew up in a ski area. So I was thinking of skiing. I was, on ski racing, and there was an opportunity to be a torchbearer for the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid. And it was an essay. So I filled out an essay just like the essays for college. And I went to Lake Placid and I saw luge. And that's where I was just fascinated by the sport. And I was able to do a beginner's program, and one thing led to a next. And I think it's very similar to flying is, you'll, back in the day I was a flight instructor, and you'll have a student, and after 3 lessons, you can always tell, does the student have the aptitude to be a pilot? That's just the hands-eye coordination. It's the same thing in the sports of luge or bobsled. You can tell very quickly if somebody has that aptitude, and enough people said you should stick with it that I did. And so I started spending all winters in Lake Placid, and then later in Europe training, and eventually made the Olympic team in the sport of luge. Did that for about 12 years. During that time also was learning to fly in parallel, and ultimately, worked in the corporate area, flight instructed, corporate, and became a pilot. And so that's where this interesting, I continued flying actually at United while I was still competing. So United gave me some time, and then I finally retired. But then I decided to come out of retirement to try bobsled. And so those two things kind of paralleled, and eventually I retired from the sports in 2002, right after the 2002 Olympics.
Okay. Well, I knew there was an interesting story, but
yes.
maybe a little bit more about about your attraction to aviation, though. I mean, so you mentioned that, talk about that a little bit more. What really kind of lured you into aviation?
Well, like I said, in fact, airplane was one of my first words as a kid. And I think many of the folks in the audience, it's very similar and a similar path. The only thing that was dissimilar perhaps is that I was a young girl and not a young boy. And, we're talking in the 60s and 70s. And so my mother was a school teacher, would bring us to the local airport, Cable Airport in Southern California. And there was a little cafe there that had a window, and you could watch the small aircraft, and Cessna 152s take off and land. And I remember going up to one of the aircraft, and I was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, wee little kid. And one of the pilots let me sit in the cockpit, and I don't remember what aircraft. It was probably like a Cessna 152. And I just remember the things that parents can introduce their kids to, just how it can spark. And it really put that interest in me. I didn't think of it as a career because at the time I didn't know any other pilots. It just didn't occur to me, but it was something that I wanted to do as a hobby. And once I graduated eventually from college and was working in the television industry for the local TV station, I was finally earning enough money to learn to fly. So I literally went to the local airport and took 3 lessons for the sake of, I always tell people, take 3 lessons. After 3 lessons, you can see. And I very quickly became attached to it. Over the course of several years, realized that I enjoyed flying. I became a flight instructor while I was still working in the television station. And although I would make much more at the TV station in my job than I would as a flight instructor, I much preferred flight instructing. And I always believe that people should follow their passions, follow their heart. And so I, switched careers, started pursuing it, went into the corporate world, and eventually went to United. So that was the path. It was perhaps accidental initially, but then became very purposeful once I realized the path was possible.
I didn't realize you were flying and competing simultaneously. That's a pretty hectic schedule.
Yeah, yes, it was. I would, although it was kind of fun, and that I went and got checked out in Salzburg, Austria. So got a license there, and I also during the breakup of the Soviet Union back in the day in the 90s, I had befriended one of the pilots that used to fly our luge teams around, and he was from Aeroflot, and they divided into 30-something Aeroflot divisions, one of which was for Latvia. And so I helped them think through becoming their own entity, and ultimately I got a pilot's license from Latvia as well. So yeah, it's just it wove in throughout time. So it's been a fascinating journey, and I do believe, following your passion both from an employment perspective and in a hobby perspective. I think those who are pilots know that it's just embedded in our souls.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You mentioned corporate. You did fly corporate for a while and then eventually joined United Airlines. You were a captain flying the 737.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to leave to join a smaller carrier in JetBlue?
Well, I think, obviously that was probably the hardest decision of my life. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at United, and was there for 13 years. Went obviously through tough times at a time with United when we've had challenges and after 9/11 and et cetera. I did see I have an innovative spirit, and I felt that I saw what JetBlue was doing, and I just thought that this was, again, follow your passion. It is hard though to walk away from the seniority number to start. I went from being a very senior captain down to junior first officer on reserve in New York. But that's how the airline industry is. So I really and I've enjoyed the time at JetBlue. It's I have no regrets across the entire career, and it's enjoyable now to help with the blessing of JetBlue as an investment to help Joby scale. And Joby will be going public here soon. So it's not only a good investment for JetBlue, but it's being on the leading edge of innovation, which is something I enjoy doing.
Absolutely. It is all about the number in the airline industry, isn't it?
Well, look, I'm a believer of the seniority system. So that is what it is, but it does make it a hard decision to walk away from that.
Absolutely. Well, you did have an amazing career at JetBlue. You were captain on the Embraer 190, served in operational and strategic roles within flight ops, system ops, people, airports, customer support, and the head of talent for the carrier. You are an industry leader, no doubt. What sorts of experiences prepared you to have success and lead so many different parts of an airline?
Well, I think, and as a pilot, I think the unique thing when in the airline industry, the pilot does touch many different departments and knows what is going on. And I'm very, very curious. So having the opportunity, first I came in as a first officer on the Airbus, and then upgraded, and it was when the first class when JetBlue first got the Embraer. So really class right behind the check airman. Because again, I decided to wait, instead of upgrading on the Airbus, I would go to the Embraer because it was a new aircraft. Because JetBlue was the first airline to operate the Embraer 190. And just a yearning and desire to be curious, and there were challenges we had at the company in our system operations. We were growing very fast in the mid 2000s, opening, I think we were getting 35 aircraft a year and opened 16 cities or something. We're just growing very, very fast. And so helping then to scale system operations, put in new technology there. That was very rewarding, helping our airport operations and putting more processes there as you scale. Also very interesting. But I have to say, my biggest passion is around the people and talent, and thinking about, the airline pilot shortage that would be coming, the demographics we know. First it was age 60, then a little bit of a reprieve when it changed to 65. But building in programs, and JetBlue's been a leader in this space, and we began thinking about this well over a decade to build out our gateway programs. And Embry-Riddle is a partner of our gateway programs. There are many graduates that have gone from Embry-Riddle to our partner at Cape Air and then on to JetBlue, so helping to build out those. So when I look back, on the contributions, I think of those programs, and then also helping to inspire the young kids, that we do programs at the various at Sun and Fun and Oshkosh and such. So these are the things. I think it's just following passion and an intense curiosity.
Yeah. And we're really proud to be a part of that, a partner with JetBlue in that. That's an important thing. And you're right, a lot of Embry-Riddle students have taken advantage of that and have now found themselves at the airline with very productive careers.
And I don't know what the stats are now. It's been a while. You know, after I finished the job head of talent, I moved over and founded our venture program. But I do remember at one time, and it probably is still the same, that we had more graduates of Embry-Riddle in the pilot ranks than any other university out there. Maybe I'll cause a little bit of a rivalry by saying that, but I had that data point. It was about 5 years ago. So we'll see over time if that remains, but we're just so passionate. I mean, the students coming out of the program just do so well at JetBlue.
Excellent. Happy to hear that. And we'll take that as a point of fact. One of the issues you've worked on, Bonnie, during your career at JetBlue is workforce diversity.
Yes.
That's something we're working hard on here in the university and in my college, aviation. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on how we can create and increase awareness among girls and underrepresented minorities about career paths in the aerospace industry. You focused on this for a long time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I truly, truly believe it's about exposing kids to it. And like I said, I would not be a pilot had my mother not just brought me to the airport. And then I didn't even think of it as a career until I ran into someone who talked to me about, this is how you go about doing it. I always thought you had to be just in the military. And back in when I was becoming a pilot, most of the pilots of the airlines were out of the military. But so it's teaching and getting out into the schools. And so this is and it's really around fifth grade. Fifth grade is an incredibly important age. Because this is where the girls and boys have equal passions and tend to do equally well in science and math. But then there's the social network that kicks in around fifth grade. And so exposing the girls at that age is incredibly important, whether it's through Girl Scouts or it's through Young Eagles or chapter. And so I guess my call to action for everyone in this audience is to think of girls in fifth grade. This is girls that are around 10, 11, 12 in that age, and find someone and bring them to the airport, engage with them and just show them. And if we all reach out to girls, I know I would not be here had I not had that exposure. And it was and it is through that and then defining the career path. So helping the girls. So I was exposed to it as a young age, but I didn't really think of it as a career until somebody sat down with me and said, this is how you do it. Here's how you build your experience. You get your, here's how you do it if you don't go into the military. Now, there are a lot of people also, young girls as well, if they see role models and they see moving into the military. And so we're seeing an expanding diversity in the military as well. So I think it's really about exposure. And I've always said, the airplane doesn't know if you're a male or a female. So they're equally talented across. It's just about getting exposure to this, exposure to the career, exposure to the joy, and taking that first flight.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We used to think that exposure needed to happen in high school. And then we realized it needs to be much earlier, middle school, or even earlier. The research suggests it's even earlier than that, isn't it?
Yes. And one of the other things I think, and this is where, I'm passionate about, we start thinking about advanced air mobility and urban mobility, is one of the areas that are a challenge for women if they choose. It is hard. I mean, I'm a mom too, so I raised my daughter. She grew up in the family of an airline pilot, and it is a challenge, to take the time off to raise a kid and then and to be gone. I was flying the 777 and the 727. I'd be gone for 2-3 day trips. And how do you manage that as a mother? And so urban air mobility by definition is in an urban area. So you're not going to be flying a Joby aircraft on multi-day trips. So will be located in one urban area. So I imagine this as a very attractive opportunity for people who want to stay in one location and be home every night. And so I think that will also allow a nice work-life balance for those who wish to raise a family while also flying.
It's a great point. Yeah, I would imagine that would be very appealing to kind of a large segment of the folks we're training here. So that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So Bonnie, prior to joining Joby, you were part of a team, as we mentioned, that founded JetBlue Technology Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be clear for our audience, that's a corporate venture capital firm focused on investing in early stage startups who are dedicated to improving the travel, hospitality, and transportation industries. Mm-hmm. The company invested in proof of concepts as a method of trying out promising startups with JetBlue. One of those companies that received funding is Climacell. Mm-hmm. That's a weather technology company that generates minute-by-minute weather predictions at near pinpoint accuracy. That technology can certainly help airlines and corporate aviation entities minimize operational disruptions. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And Climacell is another great success for JetBlue Technology Ventures. I remember meeting the team. There was a gentleman who was from the Israeli Defense Force. He was a fighter pilot, and he went to, it was either Harvard or MIT. And I know that people will get upset when I say, but his other partner came from the other school. So it was a Harvard graduate and an MIT graduate. One was in computer science and one was aviation. And the two of them got together and we met them, and the team itself, I think, was 4 people. And they had this idea, and that cell towers, the signal between cell towers, and cell towers are ubiquitous now, that the signal attenuates differently depending on the type and intensity of precipitation. And they discovered and then patented that they would be able to pull this data into a database and determine what was at the ground level, outside of airports, outside of where there's radar coverage, what the weather, the type and intensity of precipitation. Now, that type of knowledge is useful for not just aviation, but for insurance industries, for major league games. So, for example, is it going to shut down a game because of rain or not? And so, but because one of the founders is a pilot, he knew where the value was on the aviation side. So a fellow classmate works at JetBlue. And so we just made the introduction, and they first came in and he was thinking of it just from the pilot's perspective, but not from sort of the regulatory side. Remember, we have to take approved weather. You can't just take it, from a startup. So we helped them think through that structure. And we said, look, why don't we start using it as an additional data point for sort of situational awareness for ramp operations. So for example, they were very, very good at predicting when lightning would hit. And so that's a safety factor. So we started implementing at JetBlue this platform. We helped them build out what is the user interface look like? What do the airport operations folks need? So we weren't using it for dispatching or anything like that, but more just situational awareness for the ramp ins for safety. And it helped identify times when we didn't need to shut down the ramp, and it identified times where we did, without just kind of looking out the window and seeing where lightning was, or using the weather system. So that's where it started. And then gradually, and they've been working with our dispatch team to get EWIN certified as well, is embedded across our network. And now other airlines are using it as well. And then they've even grown even more. They too are looking to potentially go public. So that could be a very interesting investment for JetBlue. They're now in satellites. So it's now called Tomorrow. The company, they switched from Climacell. Their new name as of about a month or 2 weeks ago is called Tomorrow, tomorrow.co. And it's just amazing to see these tiny companies that were only 2 or 3 people with this great idea, and to partner with corporations. That's what corporate venture capital is. It's more about the ideas. We don't invest a lot of money, but more we invest time and effort to help these companies grow. And that's what we did with Climacell. And we've done it with several different other companies like Joby. And it's it's invigorating also for our crew members at JetBlue to interact with these innovative companies and to learn. We get sort of in our day-to-day business and to see new ideas coming out of whether it's Silicon Valley or Boston or any number of the new. Austin is now a growing area where there's some amazing technology. New York City, we're actually helping out because Florida is such a important market for JetBlue, but it is also now emerging as a new technology center for new innovative ideas. And so I think even Embry-Riddle is doing some partnerships with some innovation and startup boot camps and things like that, because there's so many neat ideas now.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds really like a really interesting proposition for a company and for you in that business at that time to listen to these great ideas and try to understand the great ideas and maybe the not so great ideas, but how they can be given guidance to be successful. So really interesting. Well, let me turn back to Joby a little bit. Joby's been on an amazing run. The company has raised hundreds of millions of dollars through investors, including Toyota, JetBlue. It acquired Uber Elevate in January, and last month announced it intended to merge with a special purpose acquisition company, which provided Joby another 1.6 billion of capital. So I read somewhere that the total valuation of Joby will be something around $5 billion, and you're going public. But there are dozens of rivals in this market. My question is, what makes Joby special and what will ensure its success going forward?
Well, Joby's been heads down for 10 years. And we've built an amazing team. The number of engineers and world-class experts that are here at this company, I'm incredibly humbled. So I won't go into commenting about competitors. Our approach is to really focus on where we are and where we are in our development process. We are the first to achieve the means of compliance approval from the FAA. And what that means, because we're using Part 23 process, is we work very collaboratively with the FAA. It's been a long journey together and to identify, here's what are the regulations and rules we will follow to certify our aircraft. This is a huge milestone, because when you think about it, if you go back 10 years, when you certify aircraft and propulsion systems, think of propulsion systems, you either certified as piston or turbojet and turbine, right? There wasn't electric at all. So there's a whole new regulations that are built up around this. So we've achieved our means of compliance, the first to do so. We are operating and flying a vehicle, full-scale vehicle now, that is operated in partnerships with the Department of Defense. So we've also achieved the first U.S. Air Force airworthiness approval to operate these vehicles on military bases, which we will be expanding over the course of time prior to our certification. It gives us that experience. So really, in the end of the day, it comes down to our team, our technology, and our partnerships. The partnership we have with Toyota is absolutely tremendous. You think about this, one of because we're designing and we are also manufacturing our aircraft, to have a partner like Toyota, they're fully embedded with us. So we have quite a few Toyota team members that are partnering with us on a daily basis as we've been building out our programs. And we've hired amazing talent. On the OEM side, we have folks that have come from Boeing. We have folks from Airbus, from Pipistrel, a lot of airframe in the conventional aircraft space, helicopters, Bell. So really, we're embedding this company with some people who have decades of experience in aircraft certification. So these are areas that, in the end, it's going to be our people.
Excellent.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our founder, Joe Ben. And the end of the day, you know, every great startup has an amazing team, but it also is led by someone with amazing vision. And Joe Ben Bevert is, he dreamed of this when he was 8 years old. You know, he lived in the Santa Cruz Hills and wanted to, and it was a long school bus ride to work or to work to school. And he wanted to fly a helicopter there. And then he realized, but it's, he has a deep passion around sustainability and taking care of our planet. And in his mind, helicopters were noisy and they burned a lot of fuel and smelly. And, you know, when you're an 8-year-old kid, these are the things you think about. And he said he wanted to make it electric, even when he was 8 years old. Well, unfortunately, batteries weren't capable at that time, but it did define his career path. He, you know, got his double E. I think he went to UC Davis, and then continued to study and build out until he did a bunch of other startups to raise money over time. It was a very successful entrepreneur until the point where it looked like battery technology was where it was going to be. And so he founded Joby in 2009 with a small team and has been building very methodically along, always with this vision of where we are headed now and where people can see. I encourage people to go check out what it looks like on our website at jobyaviation.com, and you see the aircraft flying. It's truly remarkable. The aircraft does take off. What allows us to have more range is it does take off vertically, it transitions to horizontal flight. So it flies like an airplane. So it allows us to have longer range when you have the lift off the wing as opposed to just vertical lift.
I only met him for maybe 30 minutes on my visit out there, but seemed like a fascinating individual and huge vision, and he's executing it.
Yep. Yeah, it's all about the execution, milestone by milestone. We're not a flashy company. We just like to heads down, bring great people together and work. This is a challenging project, right? This is something that's been a decade in the making. And when you see the vehicle, and more importantly, when you hear it or don't hear it, it's absolutely remarkable. 65 decibels or less, and which is 100 times quieter than a helicopter. So it's truly remarkable. I encourage you to come back and visit so you can see it. You can see it fly.
I'd love to. The vehicle has a pilot and 4 passenger seats. We mentioned has a 150-mile range and a top speed of 200 miles per hour. And in Joby's words, is as quiet as a conversation. Talk a little more. You mentioned this is going to be certified under FAR Part 23. Talk a little more about that, if you would, what that means, what that entails to get that certification.
Sure. Part 23 is a new way of certifying aircraft, where it's a collaborative with the FAA to define what are their criteria by which to certify the aircraft, more consensus-based, as opposed to here's the rules and you have to fit within them. And when you're doing new technology, the existing rules that were written didn't, as I mentioned, for example, don't cover electric propulsion. And so the FAA recognized this some time ago and developed Part 23, which is this collaborative process, and because how we will certify our aircraft will be different than another aircraft in this space. So Part 23 allows for the innovativeness while also adding the appropriate structure that is required to safely certify an aircraft. So it's really a partnership.
Very good. So I know I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question. I know my students would love to know, how long do you anticipate that it will have a pilot aboard before going fully autonomous?
Well, I will. It's incredibly important for us to point out that we are certifying this aircraft as a piloted aircraft to fit within the existing framework of regulations. It would be a commercial. It's an airplane. It will be airplane pilots, not powered lift, not helicopter. It's airplane pilots with special training, with special designated training from Joby, and Autonomy is a very, very long process. It is not something, I mean, you can look at what's happening in the automobile industry. There isn't a fully autonomous out on roads. It's a long journey. We are focused now on the piloted side, and the piloted side for quite some time. Who knows the time frame for autonomy? In our focus at the scale, and again, through our public documents, I have to be mindful of, what is publicly available. Our public documents show the scale of how rapidly we're growing and how many pilots we'll need. So it will be a great place for pilots to come. The initial certification, so to go into commercial operations as a Part 135 carrier is 500 hours. So it's a great place to come to build. We're building out some flight training programs as well, because as we all know in this industry, you can't fly an airplane without pilots, and you need the pilots, and you need to build a nice, strong pipeline that is crucial to our business model. And so building collaborative partnerships, not unlike we did with JetBlue with the various universities, and also building out our own pilot training program. So our focus, particularly on the operations side, is very much on piloted. There will someday be autonomy, whether that, who knows how long that will take.
Mm-hmm. Understood. So Bonnie, you know the aviation industry really well. You've been around this for a long time. What makes you optimistic about the future of the industry?
Yeah, so I think, once, particularly companies like what we're doing at Joby, where it makes it much more accessible and accessible for the industry, for pilots, accessible for passengers, people, the price point, we'll be bringing the price point down to make it much more accessible for people in urban areas to be thinking about, even on the commuting side of things. I think it will take time, but the adoption over time in our urban environments, it truly opens up what we'll call the third dimension right now. And if you think of, cars and yes, COVID has made a big change where there's a lot of people working from home, but we do have our major metropolitan areas, and people will come back and congregate in the cities, and you end up with traffic jams, and you end up with wasted time. And this allows people to be much more efficient. One of the the vision of Joby is to save 1 billion people an hour a day, and doing so sustainably. So I think it shows where innovation can truly unlock more in the human potential, but also do it in a way that is incredibly sustainable. Excellent. I think you're seeing in the industry, the entire industry talking about being carbon neutral, aviation industry by 2050. How are they going to do that? Part of that is through electric propulsion. And, there are other technologies out there as well. I think electric propulsion will serve the foundation. It will take a long time for electric propulsion to be in larger aircraft, just because of the battery to weight ratio. And there's other technologies that might be good, hydrogen in the future for long range. But I think that as we move to, the eVTOL initially, because that works in the power to weight ratio, it'll gradually move into more regional travel, perhaps regional aircraft, 7 to 9. There's several companies out there, very excellent companies in that space. So I see that transforming aviation.
How, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, people you looked up to, or people who are influential to you in your career. Mm-hmm. How have mentors played a role in your career?
Well, I think, and I'll go back to the story I started earlier on with the person who came to my school and inspired me. And I think there are some people who maybe it's their parents who introduced them to aviation, but for those who did not grow up in an aviation family, the first thing is that exposure. And so John Goddard, he was the first. And then the next is meeting someone who helped with thinking through the career path, a gentleman. And yes, most of my mentors have been men in the aviation industry. It is mostly men. But so somebody took the time when I was in college to map out. I was learning it was just as I was graduating from college, I was learning to fly. And I literally just thought of it as a hobby. I did not think of it as a career at all. And I suppose if I had thought about it, maybe I would be more purposeful initially. But I sat down with someone and he said, you know, I see the light, the twinkle in your eye every time you come back from flight lessons. Have you thought about that as a job? And, you know, that he to this day, it's a big shout out. His name is Peter Bang, and he's someone that's very involved at Stanford. And he's a pilot himself. He owns he owned a 414 and then a Cessna 421. I still remember when he took me flying in it, and that's when he sat down. So he has been one of the biggest mentors for me over time. And he kept reminding me, you need to follow your passion. And I think this is something that a career as a pilot is not an easy one. A career in aviation in general is not an easy one. People can, yes, you can go make more money in other spaces, but I think in the end of the day, it's where's your passion. And if your passion is in aviation, it was Peter Bing that helped me see through that. And then as I moved on to the airlines, I had a wonderful mentor at United, at one of the chief pilots in my local base, who he was very, very supportive. And then at JetBlue, Joanna Garrity, who is now our COO and president. She was, when I came to JetBlue, she was many levels down in the organization, but, you know, she took time out to spend time with me. She was on the legal team at the time to, you know, introduce me to various folks. When I came into headquarters, I was a pilot. And so I didn't know the people in corporate. So she would introduce me. She was a woman leader in the company. And I think to see someone rising up as a woman leader, she took an interest. So we spent many an hour where she was explaining, you know, just the very structure of the airline and such. And then she moved up through the organization and was one of the first female officers at JetBlue. And now as COO and president, she's been a big advocate for JetBlue. She's been an advocate for our gateway programs, the JetBlue Foundation, and she's also a mom too. So this is really neat. So these are some of the mentors that I have. A person doesn't have to be too far in their career to be a mentor. And I'm just going to keep coming back to those girls who are in, as you mentioned, middle school. And if we can all commit to finding one girl in middle school that we can mentor just for a little bit to introduce aviation, we will truly transform this industry in 20 years, because those little girls will then become pilots or aeronautical engineers. Or, I mean, this industry with the urban air mobility and advanced air mobility is, when you asked about transforming the industry, the demand for skilled people in this space as engineers, as pilots, as air operators is just exploding. So this is just a great time to be in the industry. And I do look forward to the day where we can bring an aircraft down, down to Daytona, and maybe another one over at Prescott. My daughter went to Prescott, so to show our aircraft. It's truly remarkable.
Very well said. And Bonnie, I know you have a lot of demands on your time. I think we'll wrap it up there. This has been a really, really fascinating discussion. You've had an amazing career, which just continues. And best of luck to you and to Joby for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can watch a recap of any of our previous webinars on Embry-Riddle's YouTube channel by going to our webpage and clicking on past presenters. That web address is erau.edu/aviation-outlook, or just Google Embry-Riddle Aviation Outlook. Our last two programs, one with Eric Lindbergh on April 13th and Jared Isaacman on March 29th, were really extraordinary. And our Aviation Outlook team highly recommends them to you. Our thanks once again to Bonny Simi with Joby Aviation, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar. For everyone here at Embry-Riddle, stay safe and good night.